not even mail, SMSs, nothing. He's sort of, he's isolated.
Okay, let's start.
Yeah, okay, fine. We will get on with the, I think everybody is here. Can we close the door, please? Okay, we'll get started. As usual, let's get on with the session. Questions, please make a note of it on your notepads. We'll have a question and answer session at the end of it. This is mainly to keep up with the flow of thought for the speaker and for the participants as well. Thank you.
Switch on the... Is it too loud?
This is a, what do you call this? Ego surfing. Ram also tells me, you search for Traders Carnival, it shows up a sign of, it says DJ and then goes to the about page directly. Well, for us, seriously, I know there's some dialogue in a Tamil movie. This doesn't really matter. Very seriously, jokes apart. Mainly because, we are here for a particular reason. We want to come here, learn, meet people, like-minded people, share ideas, thoughts, strategies, and end of the day, have fun doing it. So that's the idea of these two days behind us. Sorry? Oh, these chocolates are lovely. Shiva, thanks. That part of the program was sponsored by Shiva Galrani from Dubai. The chocolates, they're really good. Thanks, Shiva.
No, I have everything. I can start. Just need to see if this voice level is correct. Just check it.
Do a quick audio check.
Okay.
Look at this, move your head and all this stuff, you move your mic accordingly. Or I can put this plus this so that it goes.
No, I think we should be fine. Okay, so let's start. So my name is Naveen Swami, and people call me a speculator because that's my iCharts handle. Now my wife calls me a full-time gambler, gambling with family's money. That is the image of any trader in India. If you say you are a trader, the eyes will roll.
Should we dim the lights in the front? Yeah? Jet bats. Hey, Minadi Matana. Is it slightly better? No? Can we darken the room? Two more lights. The render light.
So let me just stand here. Okay, so the system is called SSPS. I don't know how this name came up. If I were to name the system, I would call it as something like suite using the pivots defined by the EMA. Okay, and the people, the way the name SSPS came was initially this was published on one of the forums in iCharts, and I was a very quiet trader. I never discussed any of my strategies with anyone. Even today, I don't discuss any of my live trades with anybody for a reason. Not because it's any secret, because everybody knows my system, where the entry and exit routes are. But once you start posting the trades, then you have a bunch of followers just following your trades, not your system. So the people who are following the system call this as SSPS. I don't know, I think it's called speculator swing pivot system or something like that. Anyway, so let's get to business. So yesterday I was talking with somebody here. When I started trading in '98, there was no help. You didn't even know what technical analysis is. You didn't even know strategies, money management. These were all alien concepts. And you couldn't find anybody on Twitter or some forum and get help from them. So you were just basically shooting in the dark, basically blind trading. I didn't even know what I was doing for 2-3 years, just throwing money in the market, losing it on constant basis, and so it was basically shooting in the dark. So initially I tried a variety of methods, and it took me 5 or 6 years to understand that you need to be with the trend to make money. I'm not speaking for others, but I'm just speaking from my experience that one has to trade with the trend to make money. I don't believe in mean reversion strategies. I'm not saying it doesn't work, but it doesn't work for me. So first question is, how do you define a trend? So I started with the basic definition. So this is the simplest definition of trend. So you have a series of higher highs and higher lows, which everybody, this is the first page in any technical analysis book. So this is how you define a trend. So it looks very easy on paper, it looks very easy in the textbook. But when you start looking at the actual candle charts, there are a lot of questions that becomes unanswered. A lot of ambiguities will come up. So I wanted to use this concept and refine it. So what I did was, so in this slide, you can see the traditional pivots. So you look at this chart, it looks very easy to identify a trend. When you start looking at the actual market, you can start seeing that there are so many ambiguities. So this is a pivot because you made. So basically what happens is when a market goes into a correction and makes a new high, basically that becomes a pivot. So here is one pivot, this is a lower high, this is a lower high, this is another lower high, another lower high. So I mean you have so many pivots here, and sometimes what happens is if you look at this carefully, the trend was broken temporarily. You see this? This was a pivot and here we broke the pivot. So the trend turned down. The trend really did not turn down. It kept going up. You would have missed the big move here if you exited here. Or probably you would have to re-enter here.
Oh, this is not, you're not able to see this? Oh. I don't know if it's a good idea to use it on the laptop. Can we? No, I'll just use the mouse pointer. Okay. Can you see it? Yeah.
So here you see a series of pivots. So when I talk about pivots, I'm talking about these pivots. Okay. What we call as the higher lows. So these are the pivots. So I've just marked those pivots here. So you have a series of pivots here. Okay, this is one of the pivot, this is another pivot, this is another pivot, this is another one. So if you look at this, the pivot was broken temporarily here and then the trend resumed. The major problem with this pure price pivots is that it creates a lot of pivots, and then people start classifying them as.
Is it too? Okay. So please tell me if it's too loud or too low. I'm not able to. So you're able to hear now? Okay. So with pure price pivots, the biggest problem is you don't know which is a major pivot, which is a minor pivot, and people start classifying things as major and minor pivots, and that leads to confusion. That becomes very subjective. Somebody says this is a minor pivot, this is a major pivot. So in order to avoid all this confusion, you need to come up with a set of objective rules which tells you what exactly is the pivot. There should be one definition for a pivot. If I look at a chart, I should be able to say this is my pivot. So basically what we have to do is smoothen these pivots. There are too many pivots here. We just have to smoothen this. If you know the concept of EMA, why is EMA used? It's used to smoothen the prices, right? Because the prices are very choppy. To smoothen the prices, we use the EMA. The same concept can be applied to the pivots. You can use the EMA to smoothen the pivots. So that's what happens with SSPS. So if you look at this chart,
I have only 3 pivots here. In the previous chart, we had something like 8 pivots. Here I have 1 pivot, 2, and 3. That's it. So how do we define these pivots? I'll come to that later. So is anybody having doubts about what a pivot is? Basic definition of pivot? Okay, look at this chart. This is the simplest way to define a pivot. Let's not get into SSPS. Market makes a high, goes into a small correction, goes into a correction, makes another new high. So when the market makes a new high, the prior low becomes the pivot. The same situation, again you have a correction, you make a new recovery high, so this becomes the pivot. So that is the classic definition of pivots. What I have done is I have refined this. I have used a EMA. I use the 34 EMA to smoothen those pivots. So in this case, the definition of a pivot would be the price has to touch the EMA and make a new high. So this becomes a pivot. In this case, the price did not touch the EMA and made a new high, so this is not a pivot. So the advantage of doing that is all this minor choppiness will all be filtered out. So if you have a market like this, so I would have only these two as, let's say this touches. I would have only these two as pivots. Whereas if you use pure price pivots, you might have multiple pivots like this. Things are going to become a little bit clearer when I go to the next screen. How to define a pivot. So it's very simple. So when you say making a new high above the prior high. So this was the prior high. Once you make a new high above the prior high, that's called you call it as new recovery highs basically. So whenever you have a new recovery highs, you form a pivot. So the pivots can be formed in 2 ways. One is the prior pivot is broken, then there is a trend change. So let's look at the same chart. So here the market is in uptrend as long as we make keeping new highs without breaking the prior lows. So this was a pivot and this is a pivot. Now the market came and broke that pivot. So when we broke the pivot, the trend changed basically. We moved from an uptrend to a downtrend. So now to distinguish between up and down pivots, we use terminologies like USP and DSP. USP is upswing pivot. Now once the market broke this USP, we have a downtrend. So this becomes a downswing pivot. We call it as DSP. So it takes a while to get used to the terminologies, but it's really simple. So now this is the DSP. Now you have a correction here and you make a new low. So this becomes the pivot. You have a correction here, you make a new low, this becomes the pivot. So the trend continues as long as the pivots are not broken. Once the pivot is broken, there is a trend change. So it's a very objective way of defining a trend. The day your pivot brokens, there is a trend change. So until then, the trend is intact. So here to get into an uptrend, we need to break this pivot. So you enter uptrend basically here, once you break this pivot. So these are all the DSPs, yes. This is a downswing pivot. This is another downswing pivot. This is another downswing pivot. So any questions so far? Yeah, go ahead. Why using EMA 34? Again, it's a question like why use a 3.5 crossover, why use a 3.18 crossover, or why use 10.20 crossover? Basically, you need to smoothen the pivots. You need to use some EMA. And you typically try to choose the best EMA that fits the historical data.
Based on my back testing, the best EMA fit for 15-minute charts was 34 EMA. And it does not matter whether you really use 34 EMA or 21 EMA or 13 EMA. The key is you have to be consistent with it. Even 13 EMA works. There are some people who use 13 EMA on 15-minute charts and the pivots work for them. But the faster the EMA you use, the closer your pivots are going to become. So you are going to get exit signals quickly. Your trend is going to change fast. So that will lead to whipsaws in a big trending market. On the other hand, if your EMA is very slow, something like 55 EMA or 89 EMA, then the pivots are going to become very far apart. Then getting exits is difficult, getting trend changes will be very lagging. So you always try to, in TA you always try to balance between those two extremes. You have to strike some mid path. If you use too fast, you get whipsaws. If you use too slow, you are too late. So you take the optimal one. The optimal one for 15 minutes was 34. So I chose 34. For 15 minutes and 30 minutes, 34 seems to be the best fit, at least in Nifty, copper and currencies that I trade. For 60 minute, 13 EMA is the best fit. Right. No, it won't become a pivot. Now, let's take this scenario. So market goes into a correction. It does not make a new low. So this is still not a DSP. So it is a potential DSP at this stage. It can become a DSP once this low is broken. So until then, it cannot become a pivot. I mean, you can call it a pivot if you don't like the terminologies like USP, DSP, you don't have to follow. Just call it a pivot. Okay. So it won't become a pivot until the low is broken. What basically this says is we are still in a correction. So we hit some support here and we are still correcting. And this consolidation can continue for days. Like the last 15 days, we are having a consolidation between pivots. Nothing is happening in the market. So that is a consolidation. We are just consolidating between these two pivots now. Basically in this range, not two pivots. Once we break this range, then this becomes the pivot. I'll tell you how to identify, is this the pivot or this the pivot or this or this? That becomes the question. So I'll tell you how to exactly identify the pivot. That comes in the next slide. So any questions so far? Okay, so pivot identification, you can do it two ways. One is using pivot break. So if you look at this chart, see, this was the prior USP, right? This was the pivot because the market did a correction here. It made a new highs. So this became the pivot. Oh, you guys cannot see this, sorry. Which one? Oh, I have not marked all the pivots on this chart. I have not marked all the pivots. I was just showing what a pivot break is, basically. In this chart, I'm showing how the trend changes and what a pivot break is. So we were in an uptrend, and once we broke this pivot, we entered a downtrend. That is the concept I'm trying to tell you. So once we break the prior pivot, the trend changes, and the prior high becomes the pivot. So this becomes the pivot now. The second way of identifying, pivot formation is whenever a market makes a new high, recovery high, or a new recovery low in a downtrend. So in this slide, this was the DSP, right? The downswing pivot. The market broke the pivot at this point, right? So we entered an uptrend at this point. So the market is in an uptrend now. Now for a new pivot to form, the market has to come, touch the 34 EMA and make new highs. So we touch the 34 EMA at this point. What is marked as USP here? So we touched the 34 EMA at this point. We made a new high. So that became the pivot now. Then again the market touched 34 EMA at this point. We made a new high. So this becomes the USP. So market touched the 34 EMA again here. And we didn't make a new high. We were in a range for a while. And finally we broke out new highs at this point. So this became the USP. This was the final USP. So any questions? So it is basically the same concept. Lower highs? Yeah. that's also fine. You can either touch the 34 EMA or undershoot it. It should not break the previous pivot, right? No, buying rules, I'll come to that later. So this is just pivot identification. So the reason we are, now question is, why do we need to identify these pivots? Main reason is to identify the trend. Or you have to know at any point whether you are in an uptrend or downtrend. If you are in an uptrend, you do only long only trades. You don't take any short trades. If you are in a downtrend, you take only short trades. So in this case, once we broke this DSP here, at this point, the market entered an uptrend. So from that point, you have to do only long trades until any of the prior pivot is broken. So the entry rules and exit rules, I'll come to that later. Yeah. Then the trend changes. Then the trend changes again. That's a whipsaw. So for instance, let's say this is the USP, right? So you break this USP, you go to a downtrend, correct? Let me draw it here because I cannot show that in this charts. Yes. Yeah, but they didn't break it. There is nothing like main pivot. There is just a pivot. There is something called as the trend, that's all. See, let's say these were the pivots, okay? So your question is what happens when the market breaks this pivot, then goes back up again, right? So as soon as we broke this pivot, we entered a downtrend. So then this becomes your pivot. Now if you go and make a new high, this pivot is broken. So this becomes your pivot now for the uptrend. So basically the trend has changed twice. So that's a whipsaw. It happens occasionally. Probably once in 2 months it happens. And again it depends on time frames. If you are looking at hourly time frames, this kind of whipsaw is very rare. In 15 minutes it does happen. So the beauty of it is, in this scenario, the market broke into a downtrend. You won't enter a trade right away. So you will be protected. I'll come to that. When I discuss the entry rules, you'll understand that you won't be in a trade at this point. When this whipsaw happens, you'll be out of the trade basically. Yes. You're talking about this one? No, that did not lead to new highs. It touched the 34 EMA, but we didn't get a new highs after that. So that's not a pivot. Which one? This one? This one? It did not touch the 34 EMA. Yeah. It has to either touch or it can undershoot. That means it can go below the 34. Still valid. The pivots? The pivots are based on the EMA. It has to touch the EMA and make new highs. Okay, oh, you are saying why is this not a pivot and this is the pivot? I'll come to that. So that's in the next slide, how to identify the pivots. So here I was discussing about pivot break. What happens when a pivot breaks? So when a pivot breaks, the trend changes and the prior high becomes the pivot or the prior low becomes the pivot. The next thing is pivot identification. Okay, in this slide, let me go back 2 slides. So if you read the second statement, so when a rejection in uptrend leads to a new recovery highs, the lowest low preceding the rejection becomes the USP. So this sounds like almost like a lawyer's language.